like when you're studying content and media, you're looking at like YouTubers, David Dobrik's or, all these other people who are getting millions of views on stuff. And you're like, well, I'm not succeeding. And then when someone told me when I was kind of like, I don't know, we're trying to get the audience up, and they're like, hold on a second, you have this many people with this topic tuning in every week. Like, you would kill for a webinar of that size every week. Like, you would kill for a webinar to talk about, pricing with 10,000 people per week, right? And that kind of like recontextualized like what does success look like.
Welcome to Behind the Upload, a video podcast that interviews entrepreneurs and marketers about their video marketing strategies and experiences. Each episode, we bring you tools, tactics, and insight you can apply to your own brand. I'm Joey Dowd, your host. In this episode, I chat with Patrick Campbell. Patrick is the CEO of ProfitWell, a SaaS analytics platform that provides subscription analytics, retention, and pricing solutions for all types of businesses that run subscription services. ProfitWell also produces Recur, which is an entire media network with high-quality video shows focused on topics of interest to SaaS businesses, such as pricing page teardown, protect the hustle, and boxed out. In this episode, I talk with Patrick about why they created a media network, why brands should invest in video, how they develop a new series, and how they capture leads and measure success with their media network. For all the show notes, links, and transcripts, head over to behindtheupload.com. Now, enjoy my chat with Patrick. All right. Well, thanks, Patrick. Start off big picture. What is ProfitWell?
Yeah. So that's the existential question of all questions, right? Who are you? No. So we build what are called revenue automation products for subscription companies. So if you're a subscription company, you should be able to plug in your billing system and basically get access to a bunch of free metrics, so free revenue metrics. And then also you should automatically be able to lower your cancellation rate, which is one of our products. That's what it does, or optimize your pricing. And so we make subscription companies more money automatically is kind of the way to think about it. And when I say subscription companies, we work with like software, like SaaS companies, all the way to consumer subscriptions like a Whoop. So like Whoop, Typeform, ClassPass, these are all kinds of customers of ours, or subscription commerce, which are more, physical goods that are sent on a subscription, either, soap or shampoo, all the way to, box of awesome, those types of things. So yeah, that's kind of the world that we play in.
Got it. I think that's a good way to set the stage for what we're mostly going to be talking about with Recur. So let's just also start broad there. What is Recur Media?
Yeah, totally. So we now probably 4 years ago. So we're a bootstrap company, which just means that we didn't take on investors. And, but we have nothing against investors. We'll probably take investment at some point, but when you're bootstrapped, you're always thinking of like leverage, like how do you get the most bang for your buck out of like your marketing in particular. And so, my background's in math. And so I started doing a bunch of research on different marketing channels and things like that. And to make a really long story short, and we can definitely get deep into it, basically discovered that, traditional inbound marketing was kind of going the way of SEO. So just kind of like content farms, which nothing against it. It's just, that's how you get discovered in the long tail and everything like that, which is great. But on top of that, the brands that were really good at standing out from a numbers perspective tended to be media companies. So like actual traditional media companies, like a Bloomberg or, even the Skim, which is kind of like a modern media company. Morning Brew would be an example now as well. And putting two and two together, it was kind of like, oh, these folks are really, really good at traffic. And I can give you some numbers if it's interesting to kind of compare, but they're not as good at monetizing that traffic. And then software companies are really good at monetizing traffic. How do we put these two together? So we started a media arm of the company, which was just kind of a fancy way of saying, instead of focusing just on SEO, we wanted to go after media. And the distinction is, and again, I'm sure we'll get into this, is that basically instead of going after, kind of driving someone to an offer like an ebook or something like that, the distinction became, well, we need to build audience with shows or episodic content. So something that someone's looking forward to, or at least willing to look at every single week, because it has like either longstanding education or entertainment, or hopefully the mix of both. And so that's hopefully not as rambly. It felt a little rambly of explanation of what Recur Media is. Long story short, it's our media arm of our team, of our software company.
Yeah, no, that was, I know we're going to dive into a bunch kind of parallel off of, or branch off of what you were saying. Going back to sort of the idea of this, okay, like content or inbound marketing with SEO has sort of been done, and like, what's the next thing? how did you settle on video, which is sort of the most intensive form of media to produce, versus the other options out there?
Yeah. So there's two reasons. One, it's kind of like a unique one. I'm pretty good friends with the Wistia guys, the founders of Wistia, which is like a video hosting product. And so it's one of those things where they were always, they were evangelizing why video is so important for all the reasons that people, listening or watching understand, which is, you just have a better brand experience. You have a much higher touch or high impact touch with someone who watches a video versus someone who just reads something or hears about something. And so all of that stuff. The other reason was because when you think of all of the reasons video is so powerful, you also have to realize that video, as you just kind of alluded to, is the hardest part of media because, audio, it's a little bit easier because you don't have the visuals, right? Written is a little bit easier because there's no visual or like multimedia in general, right? And so we wanted to start with, the hardest thing, right? So if we can get video and we can do that really well, presumably like it is different, but we could probably do audio really well, even though there are big differences there. And then we were already doing written content pretty well, if not really well, for kind of our market. And so it was kind of like starting with the hardest thing. And so literally instead of, and I was doing all of our content at the time. I was writing, a blog post or two per week. And I hired a video producer, a kid. He's still with the company. His name's Ben Hillman. Hired him right out of school, like out of Emerson, basically a film program. And we just started with each blog post would have a video. It'd have the written part and the video. And the video was just kind of like a summary of the actual content. And what was kind of cool for people, and I always suggest this to people who are like, do I dip my toes into videos? This is where I think you should start, unless you're hiring like someone to like take a big leap forward, like to do a full series or to do like something bigger, because even just having those summation videos, all of a sudden, like you started to see a lot more brand impressions. And what I mean by that is like our word of mouth went up, our number of people kind of coming to us and saying like, oh yeah, I consume your content because there's so many people who aren't going to read, but they'll certainly watch a 5 to 10 minute video. So that's kind of where we started, and also like why we started with video in particular. And then now we have audio only, written only, and plenty of video throughout the kind of content suite.
Yeah, I do want to kind of circle back later of like how you've been creating multi-facets or not, I don't know if repurposing content is the right word, but basically, yeah,
Sure.
Starting with video and then turning that into other forms of content. But it's still kind of going with the bigger picture. What made you sort of define? Because I was reading some past interviews with you, and you very clearly define Recur as a media network. And so, why a media network versus like we are a brand that makes videos, or like these are just videos that are part of our ProfitWell brand?
Totally. I think it's kind of like some of it's semantic, certainly, but it's also like rallying the team or rallying the focus around a different way of growing. So what I mean by that is video is a brand play in a lot of ways. It not pure brand. I think some people think it's pure brand. There's a lot of measurable pieces to it as well. But I think the thing is like, again, going back to that kind of look at inbound marketing, right? Inbound marketing is very much like drawing someone to an offer and then having them download it so you get their email address and then follow up with them in a sales capacity, right? So a brand or an inbound strategy with video, or a brand with video, probably still is doing something similar. It's like, oh, we've added video now. Now, like, let's get people to like download this ebook or sign up for this other offer. And then all of a sudden, let's follow up with them. What we wanted to shift was, like I said before, building audience, which is basically, hey, I get these hundreds of people, these thousands of people, whatever the group is, to watch or consume this piece of content on an episodic basis, right? So we have this show called Pricing Page Teardown, which is one of our products, pricing. It sounds ridiculous for anyone not in our space, but like we have tens of thousands of people every single month when it's in season watching this show about us collecting data and talking through a pricing page and what that company should do better, what they're already doing really well with their pricing to learn from, right? And it's one of those things where it's a very different interaction with your brand when someone is coming back month over month or week over week with your content, but also is starting to associate you with something like pricing or retention, like one of our other shows, or just the general kind of industry with one of our more kind of like top of the funnel shows, as we call it. And so it's just a very different distinction of like, what are you focusing on? Are you building audience, meaning you want that audience to grow, not to like, PewDiePie or YouTube levels, right? Like maybe if you're a consumer brand, that is the goal. But are you getting more and more people to consume that content every single week rather than like just getting them to download something and then get hit up from sales? And don't get me wrong, we hit these people up on sales, right? After qualifying them, but it's just a different focus, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. What, let's talk about some of the shows that you're doing. So like going on your site, just on the menu, you've got like 8 shows. So you have a lot of shows.
Yeah.
Like what are some, you mentioned, what did you just mention right now? Pricing page teardown.
Yeah.
Yeah, protect the hustle, boxed out, trade-offs, rev ops and hops.
Yeah, that's good.
So these are all very
these are all very specific, very industry focused. Yeah.
Right. You definitely have a target audience in mind, but also the production value is very high. Like, and I know you've mentioned like Bloomberg has sort of been a source of inspiration, other just media entities of like what worked and how you can kind of replicate that for yourself. So how did you, when you created these shows, how did you determine which shows to make, which kind of like what audience to focus on with them? Like, what's sort of the decision process in developing a new show?
So it really, the way we think about it is the thesis I've kind of come up with is you have problem or solution orientated shows. So for us, we sell a product that helps with pricing. We sell a product that helps with retention. So we have shows that are very, very much focused on those things. And then you also have audience focused shows, right? And these can cross over, right? So our pricing page teardown show, it's for software companies trying to solve their pricing, right? Which again is a nice niche audience, but again, that niche is actually pretty big, which is kind of surprising. But then we also think about like, if it's strictly an audience focused show, that's basically just like pure brand building, more generalized content. So this is our Protect the Hustle show. So it's for an audience. It's for B2B SaaS companies, these software companies. But the content isn't associated with a problem. So this is kind of like a general interview show. We try to do a little bit better than just a general interview, but it's basically a general kind of show. And that's kind of we call it top of the funnel content, which is basically like, my mom isn't going to listen to it unless she's just like interested in supporting me. But like someone in our industry will find it interesting, right? They might not be the right buyer. They might not necessarily be the person who, or they might not have the problems that we solve with our product, but it's like more awareness. And then these other problem shows are more for like, deeper in the funnel shows where it's like you either have this problem or you're a practitioner of this problem. So it's like a much, much higher, richer kind of contact. And, normally that's kind of what happens too with the audience, right? So our audience with, it's thousands or tens of thousands for like Protect the Hustle, which is a more general show. And then some of our deeper shows, it might be 1,000, per week or per episode. And I think this was the biggest thing to kind of get over, right? Like when you're studying content and media, you're looking at like YouTubers, David Dobrik's or, all these other people who are getting millions of views on stuff. And you're like, well, I'm not succeeding. And then when someone told me when I was kind of like, I don't know, we're trying to get the audience up. And they're like, hold on a second. You have this many people with this topic tuning in every week. Like you would kill for a webinar of that size every week. Like you would kill for a webinar to talk about, pricing with 10,000 people per week. Right. And that kind of like recontextualize like what does success look like? But yeah, long story short, audience, we kind of break it out that way. And we actually have a grid where it's like, here are the verticals or the audiences we're going after. And here are the types of shows: general show, retention-based show, pricing-based show. And that's kind of how we structure things. And we don't have something in every intersection, but that's kind of how we're building. And then the one last thing I'll say here is we also found ourselves early on, I think it was like just come up with a concept, test out the concept, figure out how to produce it, because all these mechanics can actually get really complicated. But what we found is there were some shows that like we were putting in too much effort for the result. And then there were other shows where it was like we were, we wanted to put more effort in, but we felt like we couldn't, right? So we were creating this like we called it average content, but that's like not the right word, but we were kind of averaging out too much. So we added another distinction, which was, is this a scale show? Meaning we want to put as little work into it as possible, but still produce a certain quality bar. So this is like protect the hustle, right? So we do interviews, but it's one of those things where, and then there's, some things that are just more than an interview show in terms of how we format it. But it's one of those things where we have most of the production outsourced. It doesn't cost us that much per episode. And like the production value is over a certain bar. It's like definitely better than the average show out there. But then there's shows like Protect the Hustle. These are called upscale shows, where it's like, that's a show where we want it to be kind of like a diamond within our, jewels here, if that makes sense, where basically what we're doing is we put heavy production value into that. We have, multi-camera, all these other things. And we'll also spend a lot more time in post-production on those shows. And so that distinction helped us a lot, because creatives, keeping them excited is not the easiest thing in the world. And so they can kind of nerd out on those shows, whereas they minimize the amount of work they're doing on some of the more like scale, which are a little more boring and a little more like mechanical to finish, if that makes sense. So those are kind of the three axes that we think about.
With these scales versus upscale shows, did you start these shows going in knowing like, okay, this was going to be our upscale show, or do you start them all maybe as smaller bets, and then if they pick up, you're like, hey, we're going to double down on this and like up the production value? How's that work?
What ended up happening is like, we basically, it was kind of like I was describing, where it was kind of every show was getting the same like input, the same effort essentially. And we kind of like, for creatives, that doesn't feel good, right? Because I think creatives, there's some level of content that they're like, I want to go the extra mile for this, because I want to try out a new technique. I want to just do something cool. Like there's a lot of that. And then they were getting burnt out also on like some of these shows where we were doing like, the same thing every single week, but someone had to do it because we wanted to ship every single week with this whole episodic content, right? So our head of the studios now, and he wasn't, it's an evolving thing, because all of a sudden it was like, I was technically the head, but I was trying to we were trying to build something that a lot of people haven't done before, in terms of having a software company with like a studio basically. And he kind of came up with, he's like, well, we should pick, right? And there's some parameters where it's like, it's okay if an upscale show, we push the deadline. It's okay, right? Whereas like a scale show, it's not okay, right? So it just took a conscious choice, and then kind of setting up some parameters around how much time we're going to be involved. What's like the minimum level of quality, right? And basically it has to have like a decent treatment and intro, outro. Like it just has to like be professional, but it doesn't have to be like the greatest thing we've ever produced, which is kind of, and we'll do new shows that we're like, this is a scale show. It's okay being a scale show. Like we just launched something called Retention Talk, which is basically a scale show, which is another interview show specific about retention. But it's one of those things where we weren't like, we knew like this was our limit. Oh, we're spending too much time here. Let's cut this, all that kind of stuff going into it, because we had set those parameters.
I did want to ask about, because you mentioned the funnel a few times. And so this funnel you're talking about, is this strictly for your like the way you visualize all your different shows and the video funnel, or is this also fitting into your big overall sales funnel in general?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's more around, how do I put it? Like, it's more around like, I use the funnel because, and I say it kind of like passively, because it like, now it's a flywheel. Like, what are we defining marketing as? I don't know. Like, I don't make those decisions, but
it's a spaceship to,
yeah,
to
it's like the framework,
now.
It's more of a framework to kind of like center things. And I think like for us, it was, we think of, we have a funnel or a flywheel within our entire business about all the other marketing things we're doing, demand gen, outbound sales, we do, traditional inbound sales as well. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And we also do a lot of SEO, and we do a lot of like ebooks and stuff like that still. Cause I think like you don't abandon that with the strategy. You just add to it, right? That's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. It's like, oh, we're going to stop doing SEO. It's like, no. But like SEO is purely mechanical now. Like even the writing is very mechanical. Like you just shouldn't spend a ton of time or like hire a ton of people, like outsource as much as you can, at least in my opinion, and that type of stuff. But the funnel, what helps us kind of think about is like, or what it really helped us in the context of shows is like, we need to make sure that this show isn't so broad that we don't really know who we're going after or what it's going to help us do. Very, very similarly, we need to make sure that we don't go so deep that we just alienate everyone and we're wasting a bunch of time. So that's kind of like where the funnel came in for us, was like, is this a broad show? Like, it's very awareness, right? Whatever framework you're using for the funnel. Or is this something that's like middle of the funnel content where it's like a salesperson can send it? That's just kind of why we use the funnel concept, but like, it's a little bit less, it's more of just like a framework for thinking about something. It's less of a practical thing that we like very specifically map out in terms of numbers or shows or those types of things.
It sounds like the map that you have is that grid of like this audience.
Yeah,
this
that's
type
more
of
what we
problem.
attack. Yeah, and it's like, okay, do we feel like we need an additional X for this or an additional Y for that? Or hey, we have bandwidth to do another show. Like, where should we focus? That type of thing.
So yeah, I mean, you've talked about making a lot of shows. Let's kind of get into the nitty gritty. So what does your content team look like? What does the production team look like?
Yeah, it's one of those things where we have a head of Recur Studios. So his name's Dan Callahan. He basically takes on, I would argue, creative direction for all content. So he's involved even with our events. We do a lot of events marketing as well. Even, it's picking back up finally, with COVID kind of being here to stay. I wish I could say COVID's done, but I think it's just going to be here forever in a certain capacity. Then we have Danette, who is basically our editorial lead. She handles basically all the writing part. So she manages our outsourced contractors for SEO, but then handles like scripts, all that kind of stuff. If it's a scripted show, if it's a not scripted show, she'll still handle like putting together, kind of the blog post version of the show, because we publish not just like a video, but we also try to publish like, a blog supporting it. We have 2 senior producers. These folks, they're typically video production first, meaning like that's their skill or their trade, but then they're also good at like story elements, as well as, kind of keeping the trains running on time. So they handle not just like the video and shooting and things like that, but the other parts. And then we also have like a creative producer, and he basically handles, the execution of all graphical work, graphics, images, those types of things. And the way we kind of structure the team is, well, we've experimented with like how to actually structure the work, meaning like schedule the type of work, because some quarters where it was like grueling, and then other quarters we like felt like we didn't get enough done. Like it just kind of all over the place. And so what we've kind of found is we have like these quarters that are dedicated purely to shows. And then we have these quarters that are dedicated to like just very not show content. So we call these ads, but they're not always ads. Like sometimes they're like an actual ad, and other times they're just like a short form video for something. But basically like that helps keep the grueling nature of some of the mechanics of these processes not to be like the full-time part of the job. And so the show quarters, that's like we're either working on an existing show, developing a new show in a bunch of different ways. And then the ad quarters are a little more focused on like, kind of sprinty type content, or even like big ads that might take a month, but it's exciting to kind of work on, something that's a little bit different than, kind of just a show constantly.
And it doesn't help because you also mentioned that I guess every single show is structured in like a season. So you're making a season, so there's like a start period and an end period. Unlike if you were like, we're just going to do like a YouTube channel with 2 videos a week, and then you're on a treadmill forever because doesn't have a seasonal structure. So does having this seasonal structure also help manage producing so many shows and keeping it going?
Yeah, no, it totally does, because I think so some shows, like, I think with the exception of like 2 weeks this year, we've published a Protect the Hustle every single week, which is kind of cool. Like, in those 2 weeks were more like, they were my fault. They weren't the team's fault. And so it's like one of those things where I think that like, with show type, like even if you have 2 shows, you have so much content now because you have your SEO content. And then all of a sudden you have these 2 shows that even if you only do a season a year, there's a lot of remixing that can happen, a lot of recutting. There's so much stuff that can happen. But I think that like what ends up happening for your team is that it gets a little boring sometimes, right? And they can like push the show each season to another level, but that's not as exciting as like, cool, we're gonna have this new concept, go develop it, like something that's brand new, right? So for us, it helps with the slog, but it also helps like keep content out there. And then there's an element of like, oh, when's the new season coming, right? That our audience will end up having. And so yeah, I think it's kind of a lot of different elements. And what I like in particular is like it also helps us improve the cycle of from like the mechanical parts of building things basically every single year or every single quarter, because we kind of double down pretty consistently.
Is it from when the names you listed off? Is it like 5 people in house, 6 people in house? Is that
2, 3, 4? So it's 5.
it's like making video?
Yeah.
It's kind of working on video content. So are
Well,
you
technically it's all content. So that includes the SEO
okay?
content. Yeah, that includes everything.
And by SEO, you're talking about
So
just like your blog posts and website stuff.
yeah, blog posts, ebooks, the audio content, the video content. We don't do as much one-off written content anymore unless it's the SEO stuff, and most of that's outsourced to contracting teams and stuff like that.
Okay. Are you outsourcing other stuff with regards to video? Because a lot of them have like really cool 3D animation intros. They have, is that in-house? Is that like your 3 camera stuff? Is that?
Yeah, all of that is in-house. We're pretty proud of the fact that all that stuff's in-house.
That's great.
All of the 3D stuff, I mean, it's hard, as it sounds like you understand how hard that is, but maybe we should have just outsourced it. But I think for us, our whole thing was like, we're trying to build a core competency, and it's hard to build a core competency when you outsource. Now, that being said, there are things that we do outsource from video, and typically that ends up being like the cutting and editing of like the second through however many episodes a season is. So what I mean by that is like it's kind of like a creating a drug or a vaccine or something. It's like the first one is the hardest thing. That's where you have all the brains and all the like creative effort and all that kind of fun stuff. And it's the most expensive one, right? But then the second pill or the second episode, third episode, fourth episode, fifth episode, etc., it's kind of boring work because it's like it's the same intro. We're not doing different intros, right? And it's like just piecing things together. So that's easy enough to like train an outsourced contractor on, and also like protect the creative time of our team. And so, yeah, long story short, like once you get to the second episode, we typically outsource everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So you're spending that time with that first episode shaping the style, the tone, like what the show looks like. And then once you have that first one done, you're like, hey, contractor, this is what the end product should be like. Go make it.
Totally.
I think that's a pretty good. That's a great idea.
And then the senior producer also has like quality control over it. So it's just one of those things that like they can kind of manage it. And sometimes you got to fix stuff, but we've now had enough of our contractors where it's like pretty, like we kind of know we can trust the people we have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or they kind of get that communication's better, or they get what you're going for. Yeah, the other thing I was wondering about too, because you have like a lot of the shows that all have very distinct looks, just also the set wise. Like they have these, even behind you right now, there's like a nice textured wall. Are you building out these sets? Are these in the office? Are you like, what's kind of the setup with all of these like cool looking sets?
Yeah, my better half, she wanted a project because she saw this on like Pinterest, and we needed something for this wall. And it was terrible. It was so bad. Like, it looks good, don't get me wrong, but like it was bad. We used the wrong wood or something like that on here, or on these the texture part. I'm trying to get in frame. Yeah, there you go. So that's what made it worse. But yeah, sets we build on our own. And so I mean, we haven't had a set that's like not, how do I put it? We haven't had a set that's like intense, I guess, like meaning like, oh my gosh, we should pull permits or something crazy for it. Like most of the stuff is pretty doable, or a couple trips to Home Depot or that type of a thing. And so we've gotten good and scrappy on that. I think we are looking into, for some future stuff, like basically renting out sets or warehouse space to like build some more elaborate sets, but we're not quite there. We'll get there at some point. And some of the ads actually we've done, like we've definitely rented out spaces and stuff like that, but didn't take too much to build out those sets.
And what kind of gear are you using, kind of camera wise, editing wise? Yeah. What's the tool stuff?
Every end of year I get a wish list because it's kind of like dump your budget season, or kind of the for taxes and stuff. So it's kind of funny. So I am not the guy to ask about gear either, just to be clear. I will tell you from a loose understanding perspective, so we do, so like right now I'm on a GH5. That's kind of like that was like our standard core camera. But we've now upgraded to, for some of the bigger stuff, a number of the Black Magic, kind of cameras. And then the gear that's kind of like pressing, that'll give us some street cred, is we have a nice big jellyfish for all of our content. This is the thing, like storage, like Dropbox is not smart for the stuff you're doing. And so like it all adds up. So there's this thing called raids, if you don't know, but and jellyfish is kind of like a premium raid. I feel like that's it. But yeah, and then like other stuff, like the lighting we're using, the Aperture kind of classic lighting. I'm using an ATEM Pro for like switching. I don't have multiple cameras on this right now, or multiple mics, but we use a couple of those just for multi-camera stuff. And any other gear, we have a crane that we bought for like 5 years ago, and it was used just for the first time last year. I think there's a lot of toys. There's a lot of toys, as you probably know. And I always
have some Movi stabilizers that have not been used that often.
We have a bunch of Edelkrone stuff that we have not used, and that stuff's not as cheap as the crane was. And so
they make some good stuff, but
yeah, we do. We have used it before, but it's like you always are thinking like, I'm going to use this all the time, and then you're like, well, I use it for that one shot. Now, one shot was worth it, but so yeah, there's some other stuff, and then we started upgrading to these mics, these Shure mics. But I will say, like, we use it's called the Audio Technica AT2020s. They're like $100. They're USB mics. Those mics are fantastic. We still use those on a couple of things, or like when we're remote, because they're durable, they're cheap, and they just sound really, really good. And then, we wanted to upgrade a little bit, so we started, getting the Shures here. But yeah, that's kind of the thing. I don't know if that's really that helpful, but yeah, we also have.
It's always helpful. It's always
we like to use. No, I know. We also try. So I'm not like, you couldn't put me. I wouldn't know what to do in Premiere or even Final Cut Pro or anything. Like I wouldn't know what to do in this software. But like, we also try to enable people like me who can create content that looks good without having to use a show producer or contractor's time. So what's in front of me right now is I have this ATEM Mini Pro, which like does the capture card and stuff like that. But then also I have a Stream Deck, and when I record in OBS, and it's probably not worth explaining, because if you know what I'm talking about, you're like, yeah, of course, this is what you do. But if you don't know, you don't know the words I'm using. But long story short, they've set it up so that like, if I want to record a video for social, rather than them having to like cut it, edit it, etc., or me like look through it, then send it to them to cut it or whatever, I can actually record like a Twitter video without their help. And they have a bunch of graphics set up in the Stream Deck so that I can just press these buttons while I'm talking. And then if I need to do some basic cuts in QuickTime, I can. But it's one of those things where like, me as a non-video producer, I can create the content and go without involving them at all. So there's a lot of that we do, which is like, cool. How do we set this up so that I can do this myself, or this salesperson can do this themselves, or, those types of things.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think that's a good use too of the ATEM, and that's a nice pairing with the Stream Deck. So it kind of just turns on some graphics if you need them for like.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I can show you. So this is OBS, obviously, and then I have all these different, buttons, that I can set up, that have like different graphics. And so imagine me like recording a quick like, hey everybody, like here's some new data, and I can like run it over to things. I can add a CTA, a bunch of different stuff, to like put at the beginning or the end of like different things. There's sound. I don't know if you can hear the sound, but I can record that and then basically cut it up, and not have to disturb our producer's time. Which, is
nice.
Great.
And you're controlling OBS with Stream Deck shortcuts?
Yeah. So anytime you saw a graphic change, it was because I was pressing a button on the Stream Deck. And sometimes it can get a little, like I'll have to do a take or two, but again, I'm like, my time is worth less, or is worth, less than their time when it comes to this kind of stuff. So it's okay if I record it twice or something like that.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that's a cool setup for if you're not a video pro, to like have an easier way to get some stuff going.
Yeah, totally.
So you got the shows produced, you're publishing them. The shows are going up on your website through Wistia, correct? And so, yeah, explain to me the thought of like hosting it yourself or hosting it through Wistia, which is pretty much hosting it yourself, having it on your website versus I know you put some content up on YouTube. How do you think of the two of having stuff on your site versus having stuff on YouTube?
Long story short, so what we're doing with Wistia, so YouTube is a social network. That's how, like, it's an SEO and social network. And so we felt like we don't have like a very clear YouTube strategy, and we don't have really the priority right now or the person to dedicate to developing one. So YouTube for us is just very much like we're going to either do an experiment there if we think it's worthwhile, or there's something that we have that's unique. We actually have an experiment coming out next week on that, or it's just make sure there's a video uploaded every X days or every couple days or every week or at least, right? So just to have like content like indexing there. Um, the rest of it with Wistia is like we just want to control the brand when it's on our landing pages and our our website basically, right? And YouTube doesn't really let you do that much. They put stuff at the end of videos, and yes, some of the stuff has changed, but it's like we want to be able to like capture email addresses, and so we can do that with Wistia. We want to be able to like control where you go after it, right? And I think like in the beginning it probably wasn't that big of a deal, but now it's like, we have serious leads come through our videos. And so we want to make sure that we're getting those leads. So it just kind of like, kind of works out that way, if that makes sense.
Now, I mean, so one of the big things with YouTube is it, as you said, it's a social network and it's also a huge search engine and has its own form of video SEO. And so it's a good way for people to discover stuff. How are people discovering the videos that you have when you're just hosting the video on your site?
So we don't have a good solution right now. We should add search to our site, especially given people look to us as a resource for a lot of things. We honestly just haven't gotten around to it. When I'm trying to find something, I just search Google. I just search whatever I'm searching for, ProfitWell, to find it. So I know that's not like a really satisfying answer. But then the other thing is like structuring like that main homepage that you have or that you saw like for Recur. It's like that at least kind of structures like, here's what this is all about. Here's what's here. And then there's just like a feed at the bottom of everything that basically gets posted in a given week or a given time period. So yeah, I don't have a good answer, but we kind of know what we should do, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess my broader question, because you're like, you said some of the shows you get, a couple thousand views. Once the show's published, how are people finding out about it? Is it all through email? Is it?
Yep.
What's the kind of promotion arm of that happens?
Yep. Exactly. And it's one of those things where we basically email folks and like if it's a podcast or a podcast orientated show, because some of our podcast orientated shows do have video elements that we still post. But if it's the podcast, we just straight up will send, we send it to people we have the email address, but then obviously rely on the podcast networks and stuff like that. So we use a product called Transistor, which is just one of the podcast orientated they put it everywhere, Spotify, wherever people listen, and that's kind of where people get access.
And for the video wise, is pretty much all coming in through email, through newsletters?
Most of the time, yeah. So that's kind of what we do. I mean, we do some social. Our social strategy, we just didn't, again, kind of similar to YouTube, we just didn't have someone who could like dedicate time to it, and it wasn't the biggest priority. It's slowly becoming the biggest priority because we're solving the other priorities. But yeah, it's just one of those things where we need to dedicate more time there because we know we're missing, audience basically based on that.
Is there any, does SEO come into play in regards to your videos in the sense of like getting the videos in YouTube and not YouTube, but Google's like video search results? Like, has it happened with your videos? Is that part of like, is there keyword strategy behind what you're posting?
Yeah, not as much as you probably think. There's probably some juice there we're missing, but also Google doesn't make it like the easiest thing to figure out, because they don't tell you what works and what doesn't. And so video helps, but sometimes video doesn't. Like we've definitely gotten into like those little those featured snippets with our video. And so yeah, so long story short, it's one of those things that like we know it helps, but we're not going out of our way to optimize for it, as much, if that makes sense.
And so once the videos are out there, how are you measuring success or determining, if a video is successful, and then also like if a show or like just the whole media network concept as a whole is working.
Very carefully. So we look at like our LTV to CAC, right? Which is, I guess not everyone here is like a subscription business. It's like the lifetime value, or kind of like a measure of how much revenue we're getting over how much we spent on, marketing and all kinds of costs, right? And obviously that includes this team. And so we kind of track that. The thing that's hard though is like tracking it on a very segment by segment basis can get messy, because our deals are like multi-stage deals. It's not like someone comes in, swipes a credit card, and goes on their way, where like something could be very measurable. It's like they come in, they read a post, they come back 2 weeks later, they watch a show, they get on a call with a salesperson. The salesperson has 3 or 4 calls, and then they like close a deal, right? So like whenever you have that complication, we can very easily measure the end and the beginning, right? The middle gets a little messy. So there's some things we're able to like measure, like, did this person consume any of our video or audio content before purchasing? Even then it's a little hard because we don't get good tracking from like Apple, right? And even if you ask like, where did you hear about us, right? Like that's going to be very like monovariable rather than multivariable. So yeah, long story short, we certainly track some of these things on a one-off basis, but we also track it pretty anecdotally, right? And this is very uncomfortable given like a math background guy, because I want to be able to measure everything. But I think with content, I would just argue in a lot of things with business, especially on the marketing side, like we lull ourselves into like this false sense of security of like it either like has to be 100% perfectly tracked, which is basically impossible, or we're just not going to track anything, and therefore like it's going to be all willy-nilly. And I think like the truth is like recognizing the limits of your data and being able to like figure out like, does this work, and does this work as a function of like, do I have like the right information, and if so, like, can I make sure that I amplify certain things that seem to be working more, and then take away the things that aren't working as much? And so we do look at on a show by show basis. And it's more of like an evaluation period. It's not like we're looking at it in real time. But I think it's more of like a commitment to the vision on a lot of this as well. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. It's probably not that helpful. It's more like philosophical, like to get you around. But I think that like you should track as much as you can, and then just get your tracking better every single quarter. That's kind of what you should be focused on.
Are you doing anything on a granular level in the sense of like looking at watch time on the videos and being like, oh, hey, people are falling off like around this spot, like we should restructure the video? I'm not familiar with Wistia, but I assume they have like a metric of like where, like percentage of like where people started dropping off, where they stopped watching the video. Like YouTube has a graph where it's like, hey, like everyone starts at the beginning, and then like at this part, like 70% of people drop off, and it's like, oh, okay, my intros suck. I need to like, get to the content quicker because people are getting bored.
Yeah.
Do you have a metric like that? And
yeah, we do look at it. I think that the problem is we now have enough data to look at that. If we started looking at that data in the first season of a show, like I think it gets tough, right? Because it's not that measuring this stuff can be tough, but it's also not that measuring this stuff has to be that difficult. Measuring this stuff is tough, but also even if you can measure it, understanding what is good and what is bad could be really difficult, right? Like if there's drop off at 3 minutes into a 10-minute video and it goes to 0, if that makes sense, all of a sudden, like there's a lot that like you can learn from that. But if it like gradually drops off to the bottom, and then you have like your ending level of people are the ones who end up buying something or like taking a call with a salesperson, it's like, was that a success? Was that failure? Right. And so this is where it gets really murky. So we do look at this, and we'll look at it for like shorter term or midterm type stuff. And what I mean by that is like, hey, like we put this out there. Are there things we can do for the rest of the season? Because this drop off seems bad, but it's like, it's not as easy as just being like, oh, well, this drop off happened, like we need to fix it or change everything, right? Like you have to qualify it a little bit. And I think that that's what, we think about a lot of what we do as product, right? Like in again, there's a lot of different people who watch this or listen to this, but like products, you never have perfect data. You never have perfect information. It's one of those things that like, there's just a lot to fix. And there's a lot to do. And sometimes you have to like go with a little bit of gut, but it's not really gut. It's more of like you taking everything into account and then putting something out there and seeing how it does, and then kind of iterating from there. And so, yeah, I mean, the idea of tracking, the idea of like using data, like we have this data, but it's like what you do with it still needs to be filtered. And I think some people, again, they get into that false sense of security. Well, if I can track it, I can change everything. It's like, yeah, but you're not necessarily changing the right things, because what does success look like? And then there's the other people who are just like, well, I can't do it perfectly, so I'm not going to do it at all, which is also not the right answer. So it's hard. It's really, really hard.
And yeah, maybe you see big drop off, but the people that are watching it are the people that you actually want to watch it and are like your potential customers versus the people that dropped off. And like, it wasn't for them. So it's like, it's hard to determine that.
It's hard. And this is why you have to look at the beginning and the end and a bunch of other fun things as well. But that can get nice and complicated.
Now, what were your thoughts on syndicating the content or taking or repurposing, if you record a video, turning that into a podcast?
So that to us is more, it's less syndication. Syndication, we look at like, putting that on a partner blog or doing that with a partner, which we've done a couple of things. I think that, that's a little bit different. I think for us, cutting up that content into different mediums, we try to do as much of that as we can. Sometimes if it's like a heavy graph show where we're talking about a lot of graphics or like actual data, like it just doesn't make sense to put it into a podcast because it's just not interesting to listen to. But when it's something that like it's easy to have like, all three mediums, written, audio, and video, we try to do that as well because people consume differently, which is great. Some people like to skim, some people like to just listen, some people like to like watch and they kind of like sit down. Some people like to put stuff in the background. And so we try to do that as much as possible. And in terms of like our definition of syndication, we try to do that as well. And actually it's kind of a good advantage right now because people like when we try to like partner with people, it's just one of those things, that we end up, doubling down in terms of like, hey, we could do all the video work for you because we're like good at it now, or at least we know what we're doing, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, I want to do video like that. RevOps and Hops, like that was done with one of our integration partners, and it's like they get the advantage of that, we get the advantage of their audience, and so on and so forth.
I think there was an interesting quote you had from another interview I saw that was focusing on the audience through the medium and not taking the video and then just ripping the audio out and it's like, hey, we got a podcast, but creating custom, shaping each format specifically for what the audience is looking for, which does take more work. But in your experience, have you found there's a better return from taking that extra work to creating a separate video version versus creating a separate audio only podcast version?
Well, you normally don't go up the stack. You normally don't go like, we have an audio thing, let's make a video. You normally go down, meaning like I have this video, let's make audio and let's make written, right? Because that's where you already have the audio. And I think the thing is like, it's worth it because people consume differently and they consume through different channels. So someone I have their email address, they might want to watch the video. Whereas like someone who discovered us through Spotify, they might not even know the video, right? But what you do is like, you don't just do a straight rip from the video. The thing that needs to happen is you need to make sure that like you put it in the context of the medium. So what that means is the intro is going to be a little bit different for the audio version. And we might like call a couple of things out here and there, nothing like in the episode typically, but we'll call some things out a little bit differently because of that medium. And that's the thing that most people miss. But all of a sudden I've created more content and I've created more stuff that can like attract more people. And the work is very minimal typically. And most of this type of work we outsource completely.
People getting started. Any tips for people that are just getting started and brands that are getting started in video?
Say that one more time. Sorry, they cut out.
Brands that are getting started in video. Any tips for, if you, from what you've learned now, like looking back, if you're just starting off in this again, but weren't going to, invest a huge amount in creating a whole media content studio, but you were a brand that wanted to get started in video, what kind of tips do you have for getting started?
I think it's one of those things where I think instead of hiring an additional content writer, hire a video person. That's the biggest thing. So I think that's where I would start. And I think there's a couple of types. I think you have like three elements: graphics, video production, and story, or like, host or outline or whatever it is, I'm a bigger fan for like making sure you have someone who is story and video production. I think graphics can always come later, or you can outsource that, or the video person could probably do like an okay job at that. I think that's what a lot of people fixate on. And it's like, if you have someone who's really good at graphics, but like doesn't want to do the video production and can't write a story, like you're not really starting anywhere, right? Unless you're going to outsource to a particular, agency or something like that. So that's kind of how I would structure things. I think the bigger thing is like, when we hired Ben, it was one of those things where I could easily do the story elements or fill in the different pieces of like, the expertise or the content. Whereas like where he could kind of take on all the stuff I didn't know, like editing and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's what you kind of want to do is like, you can probably find someone who has all three of these things, but it's going to be really rare. And you're probably not going to want to spend the money on someone like that, because you're going to be like, I don't even know if this is going to work, even if I tell you it is going to work, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah. So what I know, current things you got coming up, you were doing a podcast van tour.
Yeah. So we're doing a lot of fun stuff, that type of things.
What was the idea behind that?
It's just a strategy where we basically are looking at, we do really well in person. We kind of were already testing this before COVID, not quite to this effect, but then all of a sudden, as things started opening back up, we were like, all right, let's use those learnings and like get out there. And so, yeah, I'm not on the road right now, but for the next 12 months, I'll be living on the road in multiple different ways in order to do meetups, dinners, coffees, events, those types of things as we kind of move forward.
And then you have a van that is a built out audio.
Yeah, that
studio.
was more like a personal project that like ended up being a company thing. Like during COVID, I was like, I wanted a project because I wasn't traveling, and we've all, well, maybe we haven't, but just search camper van or van life on YouTube and you'll fall down a rabbit hole. And so I started doing that for my personal self, and bought the van myself and all that kind of stuff, but then ended up, pushing into, the other stuff when it came to, kind of making it a business thing, which, I personally find when I can make something that's like aligned personally and professionally, like I tend to do better at it, or I tend to be more motivated for it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I totally get it. Cool. Well, I really appreciate the time, Patrick, and I appreciate you sharing your insights with Recur. Where can people find out more about Recur, ProfitWell, you? What are some good links?
I'm just Patrick at ProfitWell.com, LinkedIn, Twitter. That's where I post most things. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to help. I know this is kind of like a newfangled thing, and there's got to be somewhere I can put all this fun knowledge. But just let me know I can help.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot, Patrick. Appreciate it.
All right, we'll see you. Bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review or comment in your podcast app of choice. You can find all the show notes and more episodes over at behindtheupload.com. Thanks for joining, and I'll catch you in the next episode.